Welcome to the Midlife Manifesto, where we are embracing the twists and turns and transformations of midlife. I am Arleen Scholten, your host and fellow traveler on this crazy journey. So if you're looking to reinvent yourself, rediscover your passions, or just make sense of this beautifully messy phase of your life, you're in the right place. I will be interviewing experts on a number of different topics, anything midlife, whether it be your health, wellness, perimenopause, relationships, rediscovering yourself, new adventures, career shifts, raising teenagers, you name it. We're going to discuss it all right here. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's get real about midlife, because it's more than a phase. It's our time to thrive. We can do this together, so join me on my journey. It's crazy, but let's make it some fun. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast of the Midlife Manifesto. And today we have Tracy Donachie here with us. I've known Tracy for years. She is a lecturer in sport and exercise psychology at the University of Newcastle. She's also a yoga instructor, which is where I first met you years and years and years ago at Yoga Bomb. The best yoga instructor I've ever had. And unfortunately, she moved to Newcastle, so she's no longer with us, but we've kept in touch. And today I've got her on my podcast. So today we're going to dive into the world of really, I guess your main focus is perfectionism and in sport. And you do work with a lot of young athletes in terms of the impact of perfectionism on their mental health as well. So tell us, how did you get into this profession in the first place? Because I know you were a football player, weren't you? Probably still are.
Yeah, still a footballer, even though I'm 42 years old, but second oldest in my team. But
Well done. Well done. That's what this podcast is all about.
continue to play after
Yeah.
retiring and coming back. But
Awesome.
yeah, I got interested in psychology when I was doing my undergrad in America, and fortunately, I had a full scholarship to play soccer, football over there,
Yeah.
and got introduced to psychology as a discipline and found it really interesting. And I suppose then, because of the pressure of playing soccer, being on a scholarship, if I could go back, I wish I knew sports psychology because I would have
Yeah.
learned how to be less perfectionistic, dealt with making mistakes a bit better, these types of things. So I became interested in how psychology could apply to sport, and I completed a master's in performance psychology, a PhD in sports psychology, but looking at perfectionism, overthinking, and how that relates to emotions. And that was in the back of working with young footballers and seeing how negative that perfectionism could be. So, give an example of a footballer that I was working with, and she had saved 2 penalty kicks in a cup final. And when I met with her after, she was annoyed at herself for not catching the ball perfectly. So then I realised that this perfectionism wasn't a good thing, and I really wanted to find a way to help people, and that's why I started my PhD a long time ago now, and how I've continued to work with people in perfectionism, trying to help them manage their expectations, manage that critical nature that they may have, and that's why a lot of my work is researches in perfectionism, and I'm a sport and exercise psychologist in training, and I tend to work with people who are perfectionistic. I do get the odd athlete who isn't perfectionistic, and it's quite strange.
That was one of my questions coming up later, actually, because I would imagine most athletes are because they want to perform to a high level. And like, if you're progressing in sport, you are going to have a competitive edge, aren't you?
Yeah, and I would say that perfectionism is on a spectrum, and athletes tend to be higher in perfectionism, maybe around that competitive nature. So if we
Hmm.
think of it, that athletes being on the higher end, and other domains probably attract people who are perfectionistic, like university, maybe certain occupations as well. But yeah, I'd say that athletes tend to be on the higher end of perfectionism, but not all athletes are perfectionistic. And I'd say some of the more successful ones are probably not as perfectionistic and enjoy their success a little more.
It's a bit more enjoyable, I would imagine, as well, because we've seen it obviously when you're watching, you can just see them. Some of them deal with pressure a little bit better, and you wonder if they just adapt a little bit better than the ones that are really putting a lot of pressure on themselves.
Yeah, and I think that part about adapting is key. And I think perfectionism, may have some motivational qualities when things are going well, but when
Mm,
things aren't going well, that's when I guess it shows the challenges that come with being
yeah.
perfectionistic.
And I guess that would be your focus, is it, when you're working with them, is getting through the dips?
Yeah,
Because
definitely. So when things go wrong, how do you deal with adversity? How do you
yeah.
handle making mistakes, poor performance, things like that?
Where did you play in the States?
So I played in Old Dominion University, so in Norfolk, Virginia. So I was
Oh,
there.
okay.
Heard of it? No.
No, I've heard of Virginia. My dad used to live in Virginia. He taught in
Oh,
Virginia, actually. Yeah. And then one of my daughter's friends, she was actually at Virginia State playing hockey.
oh,
Yeah.
well, one of our
So,
rivals.
yeah, 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 yeah. Is there an age at which you think these traits become apparent? Is it something you can spot early on, or is it like even before these kids become, I guess, athletes?
Yeah, it's a good question because in one of the studies that I interviewed a range of athletes, some athletes described being like really competitive even when they were like 5, 6 years
Mhm.
old, and so very perfectionistic early on, that they couldn't play board games with their family because, they would go mad if
I'm
they.
laughing because this is my middle child. Like everyone else used to get, because he used to cheat all the time. Because, like, I mean, losing was just not a thing. That's why I'm laughing. Brings back many memories.
So you can relate to that
Yes.
part
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
being
Big time.
perfectionistic quite young. And then I would say maybe for other athletes, it's when, and I think I was just saying to us about this before, is when they've been really, really good at something, they have high standards, but then they're in an area where they're not the best anymore, and they can't cope with that, so they become more perfectionistic in order to cope with not being the best, especially if they've always been the best.
Yeah.
Um, so that, maybe teenager age range. And we also know from research that the perfectionism's on the rise. So we know that young people are scoring higher in perfectionism measures than they did in the 80s. So it seems to be that people are scoring higher. Um, and that was in university students, so maybe like 18, 19, 20. So that's maybe at the age where perfectionism is at the highest, or where it's maybe most obvious or
Why would
evident.
you say it's on the rise?
Well, social media is probably playing a big
I was
role.
gonna say, yeah,
Yeah, social comparison, more outcome metrics as well. So I think with the rise in social media, but also the rise in more outcome measures for everything. So being scored in absolutely everything, but then also being able to see your scores, see other people's scores. There's more room
yeah.
for comparison. And I don't know if you
Okay.
think about when we were younger, you would play competition, and then you would go home and you wouldn't know the results of other teams because you didn't have the internet. Well, I didn't have the internet, so
Yeah, yeah,
um
I see. Yeah,
whereas
that's
now they
interesting.
have that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess there's a mix though too, isn't there? Because I remember my middle, again, he loves winning and he's always been very good at sport. But I think when his primary school started to get rid of the competition and there wasn't a winner, he really found that quite difficult.
Mm,
Because yeah, I guess that's what they strive for, isn't it? They strive for that medal and that. But it's interesting what you said. And before we jumped on, we also said, for people who, Cambridge and Oxford grads, like those students often find it very, very difficult because they've been top dog academically their entire lives mostly. And then all of a sudden they're in a sea of brilliance. And it's the same thing with athletes. It just becomes you get pushed into this smaller pool of excellence. And it's
yeah.
whether or not you can cope with it.
Yeah, and I think also when your whole identity's based on that one thing, so probably if you're at Cambridge or Oxford or you're playing for one of the top sports teams and your whole identity is based on whether you're achieving in that domain, then that can be more damaging when things go wrong in that area. So you become more perfectionistic. And if you're no longer the best, that can be really hard to deal with because it's your identity's fixed to that and fixed to accomplishing in that area.
Yeah. Do you think it has anything to do with, obviously, I've got three kids. Do you think it has anything to do with parenting? Are we
There are
responsible? I'm not saying
people.
perfectionism is bad because it obviously serves us in many ways, but um, yeah, I guess do you see I guess is there any research in terms of how we've parented our children?
Yeah, so there's research to show that if a parent is perfectionistic, the child may also be perfectionistic. So that perfectionism is either modeled and then observed. So it could be the perfectionistic parent is displaying behaviors and the child picks up on that and models that. But there's also some research to indicate that an anxious parent could also make a child perfectionistic. So if they're constantly I guess, on edge or worrying, then that can be a kind of way of coping for the child. And then the other kind of um, theory is that if a child comes from like a chaotic background or a background where there's no real direct, I guess, reinforcement or they're not being told that they're good enough, so they're constantly looking for parents' reassurance by trying to be perfect. And then when they don't get that reassurance or they don't get that I guess positive reinforcement that they're looking for, then they increase their standards. So I would say those are the kind of three
Okay.
ways that a child may become perfectionistic.
Is it also true that the kids are given almost too much praise now sometimes? And does that create the opposite then?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of the theory about how
They
what they
talk
would
about
put.
snowflake generation, so is that just, you're brilliant at everything,
Yes,
even you're not.
exactly, and I think that can be a big challenge when, well, especially if I think about university students, because if they've always been the best, if they've been told that they're great, and then they get one bad mark, that can be, you know, seem like the end of the world, especially if they've been told and their ego's been picked up by their parents. So I think it's
Yeah.
having that, you praise your kids and you praise effort, rather than just the outcome or the achievement,
Yeah. Yeah,
which
because
is
it's
very
trying to
hard
find
to
it.
do because
It
I
is. It's trying to
even
find a
sat in
hard. It's
my
trying to find a
nieces and
balance. Yeah, because you want to encourage them, but actually you can't praise when praise is needed. Hey, feedback when feedback is needed.
yeah, it's trying to get that balance, but I can't imagine. Um, I can imagine how difficult it is for parents to try and find that balance.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest parts is actually probably just the comparison that they see on social media. We tried to, obviously, I've got two teenagers, so you can't really hide it from them anymore. But it is there every day, every second of the day.
Yeah,
But I
and
guess for
and
adults too, we can sit there and scroll and everything it's that self-comparison it's there. And I guess that's probably why, you say this perfectionism is on the rise. You're always trying to, who's out there, who's better, trying to achieve and trying to strive to that.
yeah, and people, and adults, we don't want to be vulnerable. So we on social media we never put our imperfect life. We always try to put our perfect pictures,
Yeah.
the perfect holiday, the perfect uh, time out. So I think we don't like to be vulnerable, and most people try to portray a perfect image, and finding ways to not do that. So have the imperfect photo up, have a photo that's not filtered, find ways to be vulnerable so that other people can be vulnerable and show that we're imperfect human beings.
Yes, we are just human. Absolutely. Is there a link between OCD and perfectionism, do you find?
That's interesting. In terms of sport, there's no research that's looked at perfectionism and OCD in the sport domain, and I have one student who's actually looking at that relationship in
Yeah.
swimmers, because she is a swim coach and she can see a strong link between obsessive compulsive behaviors in swimmers and and perfectionism, but there's been no research to show that within sports. But I would definitely from any interviews that I've done, and I remember interviewing one football player who was high in perfectionism, but was also very high in obsessive compulsive, um, I guess, symptoms.
Mhm.
And there's definitely a strong correlation between the two and the behaviours. So not being able to leave the house till the house was perfect, that would then translate to the perfect football and performance. And if they hadn't done X, Y, and Z, then the football performance would result in being poor. So that kind of correlation between the two. So yeah, that's definitely an area for further research.
Is this a new, like, is this growing research or has this been going on for a long time? Or is this, especially in relation to sport, which is where obviously your focus point is this where, because you were talking about, you've got about 15 people doing masters and then 300 in the course, and you said that this is quite a growing field. Is that right? Is that what you see?
Yeah, well, sports psychology is definitely a growing field, and I'd say the research in perfectionism is definitely growing. So the first research studies within perfectionism was in the 1990s, and then within sport, 1991, 1995, and we've seen like a sharp increase in the amount of research that's been conducted within sport, in terms of looking at the outcomes related to perfectionism. So perfectionism and burnout, perfectionism, depressive symptoms, perfectionism and different types of motivation. So there's definitely a rise, but I would say we've still got a long way to go in terms of covering all the different consequences that are related to perfectionism. But there's quite a few groups now across the world who are focusing their research on perfectionism and in sport. So that's good.
Yeah. And I guess I mean, for athletes, you want them to have an element of it, just not be paralyzed by it.
Yeah, I think it's about having the differentiating between striving for excellence, having high standards, being competitive, but not being perfectionistic to the point where your high expectations are unrealistic, that you're never going to meet them. And
Hmm.
that's coupled with self-criticism, this doubts about action, there's a concern about mistakes. And I think sometimes on the surface, perfectionism might look great because you're seeing super high standards, there's high levels of effort and energy, but then underneath the surface is the concern about mistakes, doubts about action. Your whole sense of self is based on their achievement.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of worry that comes with it, but we don't often see that. We only see the surface level behaviors and not
Yeah.
the turmoil that goes on with being perfectionistic, that overthinking, the rumination, the worrying, the anxiety, all of these things. So I think we want to encourage striving for high standards, but
Yeah.
not perfectionism.
And not the self-sabotaging. Yeah. The I am shit in the background kind of, yeah, if I don't do this. Is it more common or prevalent in men or women?
Great question. The research is limited in terms of looking at the differences. As far as I'm aware, definitely no. Um, as far as I'm aware, there's no studies within sport that have looked at the differences. Um, I suppose anecdotally, I've worked with probably more women who are perfectionistic than male, but that's not based on
Right.
research. Um, and I see it probably more in older athletes that are female than males,
What do you
ba-
classify as older female athletes?
well, opposed to not youth. So rather than
Okay.
under,
Like
say,
adults.
21 adults, I would say that maybe the trait, and this is only based on my small
Yeah,
sample
yeah.
size,
Yeah.
but yeah, people of maybe over 21, women tend to carry on the
So am I
perfectionist
ancient
standard.
then? 21 is old. What
Adult.
happens when we become my age? What does actually happen to these? Because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I think I can trace it back now that I've understood a little bit more of it. But and in my case, I think it paralyzes more than anything sometimes, especially if I look at my past and my history. Does it tend to calm down though as you get older? I've spoken to many women. I'm not 50 yet, but a lot of women say their fifth decade is probably their happiest decade. And it's really, really interesting. And I think that's kind of why I started this podcast is how do women of my age still stay kind of excited and healthy and kind of driven for different adventures? It doesn't have to be necessarily like success, but actually just happiness and fulfillment in life, um, rather than just kind of ride this kind of tidal wave and just kind of plateau. But is it something that kind of sticks with us forever, or do you see it tend to calm down, or do you not really work with people of my age?
Well, I guess I'll turn it back on you to ask the question, do you think that your perfectionism tendencies has got better or worse as you've gotten older?
I think I'm more aware of them.
Mm.
I don't think my behaviors before, I don't really, no one talked about perfectionism, you know, when I was younger. It was, no one talked about anything really when I was younger. You just kind of got on with it. Um, but yeah, there's quite a few, in sport, in drama, in many areas that, yeah. But it was more the fear of failure than that's probably where it paralyzed me, I would say. But I guess as I get older, I don't have the same um I guess expectations. So like I've signed up for a half Ironman, I told you, but I don't have expectations to win it. I just want to do it. I want to do it well. Where I think when you're younger, if you're doing something, you may be doing it to win the game, and it was more in team sports. So I guess there was pressure from your other team members. But I guess as you get older, I'm not doing it to win. I'm doing it to, I guess, one, stay healthy. I love the sport, and I guess just to push myself a little bit.
Yeah, I think as well when we get older, we tune into things that help us maybe in a more I'm thinking about yoga, for example. I think
Yeah.
for me doing yoga, it really helped me in terms of my perfectionism because it was something that I wasn't striving for perfection. I was
Yeah.
doing it because I found it to be enjoyable. I really enjoyed the sense of progression. It helped me being like in the moment and mindful, and it allowed me to then practice letting go of these expectations. And even though I was when I was doing yoga all the time, I had high standards for myself in a
Hmm.
ego sense. But I think through the practice of yoga and being more mindful, I was then more aware of my need to achieve was because I was using that to fuel my self-esteem. Whereas now
Okay.
I'm okay, I'm better at not needing to achieve and being okay with being myself. And I think that comes from becoming older and becoming
Yeah.
more aware of me as a person and knowing my values as a person. So I think when I was younger, my value was achievement, whereas now I can find value in being a kind person, like being a good person, rather than my whole worth being based on what I've achieved. And I think
That's interesting.
perhaps as we get older, we maybe choose things to allow us to go through that process. And I don't know if that's where psychology's perhaps helped me by delivering psychology. I've then, go through psychology myself and this kind of experience of learning about my values as a person and who I am rather than what I do.
Yeah, and I guess that a lot of that, like you say, just comes with getting older and I guess a level of maturity and I guess accepting. I guess you kind of get to know who you are, who you want to hang out with, what you want to do. You become a little bit more selective of your time and what you do with it.
Yeah, and time becomes, precious. We value our time, we value the people that we spend time with, and I think that's important to having that kind of feeling of or sense of self.
Yeah.
And I think also maybe as well to have that acceptance of like being uncomfortable. I think when we're younger, we have this kind of expectation we should always be happy and we should be content and we should never feel anxious and we should never get stressed, even though we are stressed and anxious.
Yeah.
And I think having the understanding that we are going to get stressed, we're going to get anxious, and sometimes we just have to sit with that emotion and ride through it and acknowledge that that's a normal response to something.
Yeah.
Because before, I think it's maybe avoidance or not wanting to show that we're vulnerable.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I think sometimes it's because I've been in practice for over 20 years. I would say the vast majority of my history forms now have depression and anxiety marked.
Mm.
Whereas 15, 20 years ago, it was quite rare actually. But now it's pretty much, it's not always medicated, but often it is. But it is, yeah, that's been a huge change in the last, 15 years, really.
And have
Much,
you
much
seen
more.
a rise in the number of people coming to you and a link between the physical and the mental, emotional?
There always is, isn't there? Because you live your life through your nervous system. So it doesn't matter if it's a physical stress, obviously that has a physical strain on your, obviously on your structure, like sport. But, I had a patient actually right before Christmas, and she had a really, really bad episode again of back pain. She'd been doing really, really well. And I said, she goes, I haven't done anything. I said, have you had any mental, emotional stress? And she kind of divulged what had happened. And I just thought, can you see the link? So it's
Yeah.
often the case. In the pandemic, I saw it. We only closed for 7 weeks. I saw it. People were like rigid, like no one knew what was going on. It was kind of a scary time for some people. It was a very frustrating time for many people. So it was, but yeah, you feel it because when you're mentally stressed, your nervous system still goes into fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so that's going to prepare your body physically for fight or flight. And I think people don't really quite, even though we talk more about holism, I don't think people would associate back pain, migraines, kind of stiffness,
Mm.
tension, the tension maybe, but like chronic back problems with, chronic stress.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that and touching upon perfectionism because there's a full book on perfectionism and health and the link between perfectionism and physical symptoms, health related issues. And there's a full book of evidence to show that there's a strong relationship between the two. So,
100%. Yeah, 100%. And that's why when I go, when I'm not saying it's all bad because, obviously painkillers are great if you can't sleep or, when it's extreme, but to use that as your sole treatment is crazy in my mind because one, you're not correcting the core of why the body is in that state of fight or flight. Two, your nervous system is totally wired and there's nothing actually healthy to start to undo that cycle.
yeah.
And I guess when you get adjusted, like when you adjust the upper cervical spine, you're accessing parasympathetic.
Mm,
So, it's who can't use a bit of parasympathetic, you know? So for anyone else, it's the opposite of fight or flight. It's the opposite.
yeah.
And it's hugely, and I think that's why so many people are like, I just generally feel better. Like obviously my pain is gone, but I just generally feel better, adapt better to stress. It's because the nervous system is calmer.
Mm. So if we could just put that into a little bottle and carry it around, that would
Or
be
you just
great.
get yourself a chiropractor. Is what people should do if you're listening, you don't have a chiropractor. But anyway. How old were you? Do you remember when you started noticing tendencies for yourself of perfectionism? Like, were you quite young, or is it just something you kind of learned as you started playing football? Or are there, like, if you look back, do you see tendencies in yourself?
I think my tendencies were the highest when I was in the States. So if I look
Okay.
back, I had such high expectations of myself because I was in a full scholarship. So I
Okay.
thought and I had a very perfectionistic coach and who had really high standards, who would shout at players if they didn't do well. And every mistake I made, I would think they're going to send me home. They're going to take my scholarship
Okay.
off me. So and it was probably the worst football, soccer that I ever played because I was so uptight, I was so tense, and I didn't have that sense of playing free. And I compare that to when I played in Australia, where I had like a free role in the team. I could play my style of football, and I just loved playing. It was the best football I ever played, most goals I've ever scored, because the environment was just right for me. Whereas in the States, I had this pressure that I put on myself, but maybe that external pressure of the coach and the scholarship and things like that. And there was no sports psychology support there, so I had to try and find ways to guess manage my mind, which I didn't do that because I didn't have a sports psychologist, didn't know sports
Yeah.
psychology. And I also then translated that to my grades. So I was like studyaholic, I would work around the clock. If I got less than an A, I would be annoyed, and I basically got straight A's apart from one B. And even when I got my A's, I remember I would sit at home at Christmas time, wait for my grades to come through, and I'd get A and an A minus, and I'd be like, okay. So there was no satisfaction. I'd probably just look at the A minus and be like, why did I not get an A? And I think because in the States it was much easier to get A's, so
Yeah.
you're easier to get 100%. So then I set that as my standard because I saw that as being realistic. Um,
Okay.
But after that, I realized that it caused me so much stress, so much strain. I ended up getting really ill. So I went back to do my master's. And again, I had needed this to get straight A's. It was this, I was obsessed, but I was stressed. I wasn't seeing people. I was working all the time. I was coaching around the clock. It was just a lot. And then I got really ill, and I got a tumor in my stomach. And looking back, I believe this was down to stress.
Yeah.
Um, and after that, and I got the large tumor removed. I came back to Scotland, got a second surgery, and I realized, and I remember the moment I was sitting in Germany. I decided I was going to go traveling, and everyone was sitting in the street having a glass of wine, chatting, and I was like, wow, people are just quite relaxed. This is
Why
like
are
a,
they not working?
why are they not working?
What a bunch of lazy.
A
What is this
Wednesday
place?
afternoon.
You're not going to achieve anything that way.
And I remember thinking, wow, people actually stop and just
Enjoy
experience
life.
things, enjoy life. What have I been doing for the past 6 years? And it was that moment I thought, I'm going to come back to the UK. I'll do my master's back home. And when I did my master's, I was not like perfectionistic at all. I didn't get great grades, they were fine, but I just enjoyed myself. I had a great time with my classmates. I played football. It was a great experience. But I think having that moment of being really, really ill and then realizing, it doesn't really matter if I get an A minus, a C, not really actually changed any of my life up until now. So kind of letting go of those standards, still doing well, I think was probably the moment where I decided it's not
It's not worth
ideal.
it.
It's not worth it.
No, because you can think of many chronic diseases where stress is at the root cause of it, probably most of them, really.
Yep,
But it's good
exactly.
at a young age too, because most people at a young age don't realize the link really, or they don't stop, or they just have the surgery and keep going, hey? Because it's part of your personality, isn't it? A little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. Well, it's definitely part of your personality, and my research has looked at it from a personality component, but then also how that relates to our thinking. So if you're perfectionistic, you then tend to overthink and ruminate about mistakes and worry about the future and think perfectionistically. So like I need to be perfect, I should be perfect, I should never make the same mistake twice. And if you're always thinking that way, then it creates that stress um in your body. Stress creates stressful behaviors,
Yeah.
difficulties with coping. But if it's part of your personality, you're more likely to have those types of thoughts, and then in turn, it creates this kind of cycle.
So what's the link between, because you work a lot with mental health and like young athletes with their mental health in relation to all of this. So how does that come into play?
Yeah, as well, I suppose from the research perspective, my research has found that relate perfectionism and that overthinking relates to more negative emotions in the lead up to competition. So they'll experience anxiety, anger, dejection just before they're going to compete.
Okay.
Never mind then the repercussions of if things don't go well. So a paper that's just about to be published, that I interviewed young athletes. When things were going well, it was fine, but when things weren't going well, then that had implications for mental health. So injury was one of the big factors or situations that cause them stress. And that would cause them not to sleep, to catastrophize about injury. And even if they were only injured for like a week, they had
Yeah.
this worry around injury and they're going to lose their place in the team. So big impact on their mental health, not sleeping, feeling depressed, um, continuing to worry because this kind of cycle, and then also making mistakes, not performing well, and then also being a sub as well. So certain situations seems to exacerbate these feelings of anxiety, stress, that then in turn has an impact on their their mental health, I think. And I can see that with some of the athletes that I work with is this need to perform well, need to perform at a high level. And I've seen it a lot more where competitions are a source of stress. So they feel really anxious in the lead up to competition. They can't sleep the night before, and they don't want to compete in competition because it's such a pressure situation, especially if they've got high standards and they're super critical of themselves because they worry. And I think it's going back to that, what you were saying about that fear of failure. It's like that fear of not doing well that they then want to just avoid. That they don't want to stand in the blocks to do their swim. They don't want to be in that situation where they're having to push themselves through difficult,
Mhm.
uncomfortable situations because performance is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not nice, you know.
No.
It's hard.
What is the difference? How do you get a child or a teen or a young athlete from that point to actually looking forward to the competition and
Yeah,
being able to perform? I mean, when you take an athlete who's actually in that state, and obviously they're avoiding the competition, obviously they need to compete because that's what they're training for. Because it's all in your head, isn't it? Really. It's they can perform at that level. It's so what are the steps? What do you do with these?
yeah. So I think first part is thinking about their values as a person, as an athlete. So, and thinking about what they want to achieve as an athlete. So if they think about their values, say creativity, hard work, resilience, and then when we look at a competition, I would ask them if the behaviors that they're demonstrating, is that moving towards their goal or is it actually moving away? And actually, what they're doing, is that in line with their values or is it not? So perhaps their big value is being resilient. But when they come to a competition, they're not demonstrating resilience because they don't want to compete. So how can we be mindful and be present in that competition so that they're enjoying it and then they're working in line with that value of, say, resilience? So teaching them ways to be more present, to acknowledge that, say, anxiety and stress is part of competition and trying to embrace it rather than change it. Because I
Yeah.
think so long I was trying, to change athletes' thoughts, trying to change how they feel in terms of their emotions. But actually, anxiety can be a fuel, right? If
Yeah.
I'm not nervous about something, I'm not going to do anything, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to change the perception of that anxiety so they can lean into it and embrace it for competition rather than it being a hindrance, and then bring them back into the present moment so that they can be there, enjoy the the environment, enjoy what's going on. If they, especially because a lot of kids play sport for the social aspect, but if they
Yeah.
come to go to competition, they're so uptight they don't speak to anyone. So it's trying
Yeah.
to so it's not in line with their value of being social. So how can you then lean on people, enjoy the experience, tap into that value? So that's maybe some of the work that I would do if someone was very stressed out about competition.
Interesting. Yeah. Just trying to think of an example with that I've seen in that relationship with obviously my kids. My daughter used to swim and it's you can just see the expression on some of these kids' faces. And my youngest plays a lot of football and I'm actually just thinking because some of these boys, especially the young ones, they're all lively. And then I remember taking them to their first they made it to the finals and some of them are I think they were 7 at the time, but like
Mhm.
some of them are still just bouncing around like little beans. And then some of them actually just turned really, really quiet. And it was actually really interesting to see how different kids actually, some of them got quite scared and nervous, and some of them just wanted to be out there.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting how kids will think certain ways, even at like a young age. I remember interviewing an 11-year-old, and he said that even if he made a mistake, he'd say, "You're such a loser" to himself, and he would get so stressed out about playing a sport, whereas the other 11-year-olds were just running around, not having, having a
It's
great
like,
time.
so what?
So what?
That's interesting. So you're still playing now?
Yep, so still playing. When I was doing my PhD, I retired from football and started doing yoga.
Yeah.
And then during lockdown, I really started to miss it. So
Okay.
I was doing sports psychology with it was a diver actually, and I was stuck in Edinburgh. And I asked, "Do you have a football?" So I got a football from this kid, and went down the park and was kicking the ball around. And I was like, "Oh, I really miss it." So then when I moved to Berwick upon Tweed, it's a very small town. It
Yeah.
didn't have a women's football team, so I'd contacted one of the guys who coaches, and he was playing for the Scottish Borders men team. So this was an over 35 team for men, and I joined the team. So I
Awesome.
got back into playing in the men's team, which was fun. Um, and then 2 years ago, Berwick set up a women's team. So we had our full season last year. We managed to win the league. We got to cup final, did very well, and now we've been promoted to the next league. So there are a couple of people over 40 in the team, me being one of them.
That's awesome. I love it. What are I have a question for like any coaches that might be interested in this? Like obviously you said your coach in the States was I don't know if you'd call it negative, but quite maybe hard. And then in
Yeah,
Australia it was much easier.
yeah,
How do you strike a balance there? Because obviously at certain levels you are there to win
yep,
and you do need these athletes to listen and to learn. Um, I mean, I'm not a huge keen on shouting. There are
no,
different ways, but how do you increase? I mean, you can see it on TV when you watch sports. I mean, you've got some coaches that are, I mean, screaming, and others that are actually really, really calm.
yeah.
And the ones who are the loudest aren't necessarily the ones that win. So how do you find strike a healthy balance there?
Yeah, well, I was part of a research paper recently that looked at coach-athlete relationship and how that had implications for confidence and psychological well-being in athletes. And we saw from that research if athletes were seeing that they were receiving support from their coaches or even perceiving that they were receiving support, then that increased their confidence and psychological
Yeah.
well-being. So I think having that support available, but then also if we look at say some of the theories of self-determination theory, according to that type of theory, where more athletes are more likely to flourish when coaches create an environment that are based on autonomy, belonging, and competence. So if they give athletes voice and choice over what they're doing, so the athletes feel that they've got a say in what they're doing, they're more likely to buy into your coaching ethos. But also if they have a sense of belonging, so there's a sense of relatedness, that they're part of the team, they have a role in the team, there's a connection between them and other teammates, but also the coach. And then the last thing is competence. So if trying to build athletes to believe that they're able to do and cope with the demands of the game. So creating situations where athletes are experiencing success and but also challenge as well. So that they're feeling challenged and that they're able to deal with that challenge because they're competent. So if coaches can create an environment based on those three things, then
Yeah.
I think athletes will flourish much better than just shouting at.
I guess it's the same as a job though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
kind of, I always say you can relate these things to business style as much as you can to athletes.
Yeah, any managerial style, leadership, like if you're thinking about working in a team, I think having those three principles across any group environment is key. Because we all need that to, if you think about ourselves,
Yeah.
I need voice and choice over what I'm doing in my work. I need to have a say. I need to know that I'm able to work on the things that I want to work on. I also need to have some sort of connection with my colleagues, and then I also need to feel at some point that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. 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 That's
Sometimes.
always good. That's always helpful. You mentioned we talked a little bit before we got on, and you said that a lot of students they go into psychology because they're interested in psychology. Sports psychology is a growing field.
Yeah.
What's at the end of this for somebody studying sports psychology? Because I think it's a lot of students are, a lot of them are athletes. They love sport, but they don't actually necessarily know what kind of career that can go into. Um, so where does
Yeah.
this, is it private work? Is it lecturing? What other kind of roles that could a student, I guess, use this degree in?
Yeah. So if they do the Masters in Sport and Exercise Psychology, they can then go on and do training to be a sport and exercise psychologist.
Hmm.
So the Masters counts as stage one, and then after that, they would do stage two, which is supervised experience. And there's different routes that you can do, but it usually ranges between 2 and 4 years if it's supervised. But they could also do a professional doctorate as well. So they could be trained up so do their training while doing the research element. So they get to call themselves a doctor at the end of it. They do a research
Yeah.
component, and they also are become a applied practitioner. And I guess people on that pathway, they tend to either do private practice, they might work with teams, they might work with national government bodies, they might travel around with certain clubs or sports. They might work with the Olympics, or they might do, and thinking more sports psychology,
Yeah,
exercise
yeah.
psychology. They might work in the NHS. They might help with behavioural change. They might work in private practice as well. Um, but we also see a number of our students going on and doing very random things. So we had a student who was working with therapy horses in Israel a couple of years ago,
Right.
another student who was doing outdoor education and managing outdoor education in Scotland. We've had students who then go on to do consultancy. I even had an undergrad student who finished his degree in psychology and is working doing marketing, but also examining like the marketing strategy for big companies. So
Okay.
looking at psychology behind marketing, which I thought was a very cool job for an
Yeah,
undergrad
yeah,
to
yeah,
go into.
yeah. I guess that is marketing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is psychology, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so
Very relevant.
yeah, so they tend to go into a range of different jobs. Some people, students go into do teaching, transferable skills, or maybe working in schools doing like sports development or um, working as a teaching assistant. So there's a range of careers that they can go into sports psychology. And I think also because it can be sports psychology principles can be applied to other domains. Like I know in States, the military are the number one users of sports psychology practice. So,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so any sort of performance domains can draw upon sports psychology principles, businesses, different consultancies. So yeah, there's a range of careers that you can have doing sports psychology, I think.
I think psychology comes into every arena though, doesn't it? Sports, but business, massively into business, I think.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
think we're just starting to like we know so little about the brain actually. It's really interesting. I think the pandemic was quite interesting for me to see how behaviors changed and how people were just behaved, reacted to the whole thing. I found it really, really interesting just to
Yeah,
kind of sit there and watch.
yeah, and I think about young people and going through the pandemic and how that's maybe changed part of their psychology as well. Because if you think about the normal, your average experience of a teenager, and you go to university and
Yeah.
you meet a lot of people and you have to deal with all these different things. For many students, they were on their own in their house, maybe with their parents or their guardians, their maybe a sibling, and having
Mhm.
to do university online. And maybe your lecturer or your supervisor will be that one person that you might be able to go to. So I didn't realize maybe the impact that you could have on students during that time, but then
Yeah.
also the implications of that maybe in the second year or third year, where they haven't learned how to talk to other students. They haven't learned how to socialize or
Yeah.
um, go and live
And
in a flat with other
yeah.
people.
And I think one of the downfalls, because of obviously the introduction of phones, which are very useful, but if you don't, we now have, before you just kind of had an awkward silence. Now everyone just turns their phone on. I mean, I think of my reception, and I wish everyone just chatted to each other, but they don't. They all just go onto their phones because it's that awkward silence that we now no longer have to deal with. Think of your first couple dates, like you have to sit through these awkward things. They don't have to anymore. It's very unfair. But as you see them at bus stop, nobody is just sitting there doing nothing, are they?
No, they're
But I do think
constant.
I've seen, yeah, I think it did change human behavior. I
Yeah,
think they say it's changed. I have a few patients who are teachers, year five, six. So they say, I think it was last year they were coming into the years five, six. There's kids that started in primary school and yeah, they said they're completely different. Like they said their resilience is very, very low.
yeah,
When something gets hard, they just shut off.
yeah, yeah. And I think resilience is it's like training, isn't it? It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
physical skill. It's like your things are put in front of you and you have to find solutions,
Yeah.
and it's a practice. Whereas for kids now, there's maybe not enough practice of resilience, or
Yeah.
there's maybe too many ways out. So just like you said, picking up their phone when they feel awkward, as opposed
Yeah.
to riding that out and thinking, okay, this is silence. I have to make a conversation. I have to do
Maybe I
something.
should talk to this person sitting beside me, standing beside me in the queue. But yeah, I was with my I ran with my I've got a coach this year for to train me up for this high Ironman, and I just want to see how I've never had I have a personal trainer before, so I just thought, I'm at an age now where if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? But anyway, we were talking on Tuesday, and she was just saying, she goes, we're going to measure everything at 3 months, and then it's like we then wind shift up, and then we then remeasure, and then we move up so that you're ready for that, the triathlon. But it's always like there's another level, there's another level,
Mm.
there's another level. And I guess it's with your resilience too. And I think all my kids do sport. It's actually funny. When my youngest was born, he used to just play with cars. I think my husband was freaking out because he's like, he won't touch a ball. I'm like, maybe he'll be an engineer. Like, I don't know. But anyway, he's like a mad football player now. But it's just interesting to, yeah, it is just, I think it's helped them to no end, I think, because one, they have to listen to somebody, not just a teacher, but to a coach repetitively, constantly trying to improve and, sharpen their skills. I think it's been, and, they've had to take some criticism, they've had to deal with losses and wins and take those gracefully, and, take losses where sometimes they don't feel like they should have lost based on, I guess, performance or roughing and things like that. So I think it's hugely important for kids.
Yeah, I think sport is a great vehicle for building resilience. And for me, it was the vehicle for me to travel around the world and
Yeah.
live and playing a sport that, wasn't at that time. Many women didn't get paid to play football, so I was very fortunate. But the life skills that I learned from playing football, um, and I worry when I have nieces or nephews and are not involved in sport, and I think being involved in sport is really
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
important. You'll learn
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much.
Yeah, you don't have to be the best. It's just like just play the sport, get into a team sport, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You don't have to be super athletic, you don't have to be super sporty, just show up.
Yeah, and
Be
it's
part of
just
a team.
yeah, it's the social part, it's the physical part, just learning fundamental skills, challenging your body, challenging your mind. Yeah, I think it's great. And in one of the modules that I run, we have the students look at the role of physical activity, sport, and exercise, and how that can help mental health, and they have to critically evaluate the evidence. But it's always super interesting to read the essays that they write on the role of physical activity and how that is a great vehicle for improving mental health. And
Yeah.
but we don't potentially use it enough. We're probably too quick as a society to give over a pill instead of saying, be out in fresh air, go for a
Yeah.
walk.
Yeah.
We always feel so much better when we've done that.
I know. It was one of my patients. We did a review yesterday, and I said, okay, your homework is 10,000 steps every day. And he's younger, he's much younger than I am, but he just looked at me like, where am I supposed to fit that in? I'm like, I don't know. That's not up to me. Like minimum 10,000 steps. If you don't use your body, like you can't then complain that you don't feel well physically and mentally.
Yeah. And I would say that was one good thing about the pandemic was that when people were only allowed an hour to walk, they walked for
They
an hour.
did.
Yeah.
Thank God I
And
lived in the country.
yeah,
That's all I can say. It's one
my
child after
family,
another. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
my family even were, everyone was obsessed with getting their 10,000 steps. We had like
Yeah, yeah,
competitions going on. Even
yeah,
had a group was at 10,000 steps a day, and it was the best thing. And then
yeah.
I wish
That
it
was the
just kept
first lockdown though, Tracy. The rest of them, that was nightmare.
the first part.
Yeah. I have a question because I think the one of the areas that really gets me is because obviously you're in education. What is your outlook on the state system and their sport?
Mm.
Because we're talking about mental health here, and we're talking about exercise, we're talking about movement, and they're talking about a lot of these, they rant and rave. I had listening on the other day, and apparently, our standards in education have improved in terms of league tables and performance in terms of academia. But we're seeing a massive decline in terms of mental health, even from young children.
Mhm. Yeah.
So if you were in charge right now, what would you do? Please be in charge. Please take over.
I think we need to be teaching kids at a younger age about things that help with, say, resilience,
Yeah,
self-esteem, teaching them more life skills, teaching them things that have an impact that are practical as well.
yeah,
So you think about the things that you learn in school, how much do you use it? I don't use SOHCAHTOA at all. I'm not, but things like I would have benefited from is maybe stuff to do with building self-esteem, how
yeah.
to avoid comparison on social media. And I remember before my PhD, I did a lot of work in schools, and we had a program for third year kiddos, so like 15-year-olds, and they were on the verge of maybe being expelled or getting into trouble. And what I did with them was we had 8 weeks, I think it was, where they got like psychology component, and then they also got 8 weeks of, say, dance or Zumba or
Hmm.
step or some sort of movement as well. So for 8 weeks we ran this program, and we taught them, about things to do with like ignoring fad diets, but also like
Yeah,
self-esteem, setting them little challenges. And I could see the difference in the kids across the weeks. And I remember one kid, I gave her a challenge and I said, "You're going to try and juggle your age." She was 15 and she had to go out with a football and see if she could keep up the ball as many times as her age. And I remember coming into school the day that she had told me that she'd done it, and her face was so excited. She was so happy. She came running over and she said, "I did it, I did it, I did it." And she wanted to show me her doing her juggling with her keep ups. And this was a kid
yeah,
that was
yeah, yeah,
probably on the verge of getting expelled. But I think
yeah,
for teaching these things about, self-esteem,
yeah.
um, resilience, I think we need more of that and less of the
The phonics at
over.
4.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, phonics doesn't make sense. Why are you teaching it to somebody at the age of 4 or 5? Like you're just confusing the poor little kids.
Oh, and I mean, the other day I thought, oh, I'd really love to go back to school to learn and see if I could do the work and what I'd learn. And then my niece, who's about to sit her exams, showed me the apps and all the websites that she has to use for studying. And I was, whoa, it all went over my head. I couldn't understand a thing. There was so many pages that you could open, so many things that you go between here and there, and it just got way too much. And I thought,
Yeah.
no, no, no.
No, no, no. No wonder everyone has ADHD now. Hey, there's like way too much going. Like, slow down. I know it's interesting. So when I'm trying to think, this is when my middle was at primary school. So he's 16 now, and he was at a state primary school, and he was, if I'm honest, he was struggling because I think he is perfectionist, and they were teaching hockey with plastic sticks. They didn't know the rules, like fuming. Like this kid was like so angry. But anyway, I'd heard about this thing called the Daily Mile. And so
Mm.
it took me about 8 months to get the head teacher to actually even trial this
Oh,
thing. It flopped. The kids loved it, aside from I think there was like three that didn't like it. But I'd interviewed several of the head teachers in some of the schools in Leeds, and they just said it was transformational. Like it doesn't cost the
mm,
school, the government a penny. They literally they run as far as they can for 10, 15 minutes, whether it's a mile, great. If it's not, but they said it was just transformational in terms of like just physically, mentally, their creativity, their bonds and relationships in schools. And I mean,
yeah,
I've always done exercise. And like I often say to people, I think I don't know how people get through life without exercise, like
yeah,
mentally. I
yeah.
just, I just think it would, I don't think you would very
Mhm.
well. You just, you know, yeah, just the link between physical exercise and mental health is huge.
And I think that the Daily Mail is something that's so simple, but it's so effective as well.
It's free.
And
The
yeah, and it's
country has no money right now, you
yeah,
know? It's like you could raise the standard of, you've got a lot of obese, overweight children now.
yeah. And by getting them to do something that building up to something that what sense of achievement they have. And I remember we did that when I worked in a secure unit in Edinburgh. And again, just the look on their faces when they got a little medal. You know, the medal probably cost 50 pence. You
Yeah.
know, that's great. And I did it and I got my medal. I probably still got it.
In the box full of all the other ones, hey? But it was interesting. What the teacher said too is they said we can now teach math and English in the afternoon.
Mm,
They said we could never do that before the kids were asleep.
yeah.
So,
But it's also just such a great vehicle for building like relationships as well. And when I worked in secure units in the States, that was the only way that I'd get buy-in from the kids. So I would play basketball with the kids, I'd go a walk with the kids, and they would call me like the sporty worker. But but they, you know, I would go on with them, and they would listen to me for the most part because I would take them out and I would do something, and they were always tired by the end of it, right? We'd play
yeah,
basketball
yeah, yeah, yeah.
an hour. But it was a great vehicle just to have informal conversations, to have a chat with them, to build like to let go of some of that energy that they were needing to use up. So yeah, I think it can be used for many different things: mental health, building relationships, learning skills. Magic pill. Don't know
Is
why
there
we're
a
not.
magic pill to somebody who's perfectionist that's paralyzed? How would you tell them how to? What are some of the first steps, I guess, if somebody's aware of this and it's actually holding them back? Whether they're, whether we're talking with, whether it's parents listening for their children or for ourselves. How do you get over that? Because it can be quite paralytic and you just stop doing the thing that you actually want to do.
Yep. So first thing is not basing your self-esteem on how you perform. So
Hmm.
finding other ways to feel good about yourself. So whether that's being a kind person, helping other people, doing something that's within your control. Because a lot of the times the standards we set are out with our control, or we can't always be the best in the team. We can't always be the best at this. Whereas we can always be kind. So I
Yeah.
think not basing our self-esteem on how we perform, having compassion towards ourselves, knowing that we're imperfect and that we make mistakes, we're human beings, we're never going to get everything right, and being okay with that. And then I say, lastly, this is probably something that I've had to learn, is that if you can't do something perfectly, it doesn't mean that you don't do it all. It means just do
Yeah.
something. So for me, it's, Tracy, shut up and get on with it, or just right. It doesn't have to be right. So just doing something is better than doing nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So getting a word down on a piece of paper is better than no word down. So just starting something, because I think when you're perfectionistic and you're paralyzed by that fear, we tend to procrastinate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
just do something
Yeah.
rather than nothing, because you'll feel better about doing something. And I listened to a short podcast the other day, and they said about going to the shed. So even if you don't want to clear out the shed, just go to the shed and look at the shed,
Yeah.
and you're probably going to fix the shed by just
Yeah.
looking at it. So I did that the other day. I had a document that I had to open and write, and I was really putting it off. And I thought, right, just open the document. It wasn't as bad as I thought, and I got something done. So I'm trying to embrace this. Just go to the shed, just get
Yeah.
something done. Because I'll
I
just,
like that. Just go to the shed. Actually going to write that down. It is what I say sometimes to my patients. I'm like, just put the Lycra on.
yeah,
You don't do anything. Just put it on. You're going to feel good in the morning.
yeah.
You're going
I've
to feel
an
good when you
a-
put it on.
yeah, I have an athlete who's worried about going to practice. Just go to practice. You don't have to do practice. You can
Yeah,
just
yeah,
look at
yeah. Just
you just
get
look at
there.
practice.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to the gym. You can just stand at the gym, but just get there.
Yeah. Although I
So,
didn't Wednesday because my garage is so cold right now that I should just sat by the fire.
but that's also being compassionate towards yourself, and I think that's also key as well, because if you're perfectionistic and you have ways of doing things before, we tend to think, oh, we need to do something all the time, every minute of the day,
Yeah,
and
that's true,
actually
actually. Yeah.
the hardest thing for someone who's perfectionistic is just to be. So finding ways just to be and not do is also key, because we can sit with ourselves and we can learn to do nothing, because sometimes our body is just constantly on the go and we burn out so easily,
Yeah.
and we just have to learn ways to relax if you're perfectionistic. That's
Just
what
like
I've
the
learned as I
Germans.
got older. Yeah.
Is that what you learned from the Germans?
Sit and have a glass of wine in the sunshine. That is okay.
Yeah, you're not going to be sitting on a terrace this weekend, that's for sure.
Maybe with a heater.
Any last words, Tracy? Thank you so much. I found that really interesting. I guess as a mother of three, anyone who's got kids, it is interesting to see also how your kids are so different.
Yes.
And how you kind of have to parent. You have to kind of be three different parents actually, because they are so different. They're very similar in many ways, but I think too, I read somewhere that you have kids to almost like a mirror for yourself. You see some good traits in your kids, but you also see these traits where it's like, oh yeah, that's from me. Sorry. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think that's a very good point that you made about if you've got three different kids, you need to have different parenting styles. And I
Mm,
think that's really key to knowing what works for people because people are just so unique and
yeah.
things work for some people that won't work for other people. And for the most part, kids, people don't like being shouted at. They don't like
Yeah.
being told aggressively what to be done. And, but sometimes kids need authority. They need to be told when they've not
Yeah,
done
yeah,
it.
yeah, 100%. But I think when you're raising a perfectionist, it's you have to really pick your battles because they are so headstrong. And
Yes.
they like I cannot tell you how angry he was when they were playing hockey with plastic sticks and didn't know the rules. It's the fury, So you kind of just had to, you can't say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. They're your teachers." Just you had to get to their level and just say, "Yes, that's they should be playing with wooden sticks, but they're not going to because of health and safety." So just play with the plastic sticks then.
And I guess the perfectionism, because you have different types or dimensions of perfectionism, if you've got high standards for yourself and you're self-critical of yourself, you're often or sometimes you've also got high standards for other people. And that
Yeah.
sounds like what was going on there is that
Yeah.
because you've got standards for yourself, you're also then impose standards for other people. And if when people don't meet those standards, you're judgmental or annoyed, or
Yeah.
that can have such an impact on how you feel.
Yeah.
Whereas the other type of perfectionism is the belief that other people have high standards for you. And if you
Okay.
don't meet those standards, you feel that they're going to be disappointed or judge you. And that's probably the worst type of perfectionism because it's linked to a lot of psychological consequences, but also because the expectation is out with your control. So you're
Yeah.
constantly seeking reassurance, you're constantly seeking approval. So that child might be harder to parent because they'll be constantly looking for your approval or thinking that you have standards that are sometimes just perceived and not actually your standards. And it's finding ways to nurture that kid so that they know how to, I guess, either be their own coach or be their own parents so that they
Yeah.
learn ways to evaluate themselves on their own standards and not think about other people's because that comes with the most consequences, I think.
Yeah.
That type of
You almost need a master's in psychology before we become parents, don't we?
Oh, I think that should be a requirement for the government. Every
Oh,
parent should go through some course. It's the hardest thing you could ever do. I mean, I would even need one to be an aunt, never mind a parent.
I think at some point I'll just be told everything I did wrong.
Not at all. Give them the
Anyway.
Daily Mile and they'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. That was really interesting. We will leave all your Tracy's details if you want to get in contact with her, because you do private work, don't you?
Yeah.
So if you want to get in touch with Tracy for yourself or for your children, then please get in touch. She is amazing. So highly recommend.
Thanks, Arleen.
Thanks a lot.